Right, this is part one of the 2009 Ordinary Level Junior Cert project. The airplane, this is the fuselage, the main body part. It kind of looks like the most complicated part. It probably slightly is, but it's not a huge problem. We're going to break it into two sections first of all. This first section here, and then this section. And it's very important that we have a centre line down the middle. So they're the first two things I'm going to do. The piece of metal is the correct size. So that saves us a lot of cutting later on. So first of all, I'm going to get the 50 line down the middle. So I'm marking 50, and I'm going to mark it at both sides because the T-square isn't quite long enough to reach all the way down. I'm going to use my ruler to draw that line across the piece. A few scratches from the ruler. And also I want to measure 100 up this way, and I break off the two parts. And that 100 mark is important because there are corners here as well. So I'm just going to measure 100 up, put a mark, and T-square line across. Now, we're going to start with this box here. So we have two corners to mark, or fillets. We have two holes here and these two holes. So these fillets are radius 15. That means this centre must be 15 from this edge, and I'm doing that off camera, so I shall repeat it. These two fillets are radius 15. So this point must be 15 millimeters away from this edge and this edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure in 15 from the corner, T-square line up, and then from the bottom edge measure up 15, and from the top edge measure down 15. So 15 from the edge of the piece across, mark, and then T-square. And now I'm going to measure from each edge 15 towards the centre. One there. And one there. I'm going to punch both of those. I'm going to be using my dividers to draw a circle. And the radius, the distance on my dividers is going to be 15, as it says in the drawing. And drawing the two circles. So we have those two done. The next part that we want to do is to get these two holes. They're 45 from the left edge there, and they're 37 from the centre out. So I'm going to measure 45 across from the corner, 45, and I'm going to T-square a line up at that point. Now I'm going to measure 37 from the centre left, up and down. So I have 37 on the centre line. I'm marking the ruler. And for those of you who are good at maths, 37 plus 37 should be 74. If we go the other direction to 74. We can punch both of those points because we're going to be using a ruler on them later on. So we've only two more holes to do on this section now. We have to mark for this big hole and this small hole. The big hole is 25 millimeters further on from these pair that we've just done. So I can measure from where this T-squared line crosses the centre line over 25, and then I can measure 22. Put my ruler down up against line for the 2 holes and mark 25. And then another 22. Again, I want to punch both of those. This big circle here is diameter 24, and the diameter is the distance from one side of the circle through the centre to the other side. So I'm going to have to set my dividers to the radius, which is half the diameter, 12. Not doing this in the most visible way possible. And I just have to draw the circle there. And that's the left-hand section marked out. We're now going to do the right-hand section, and we're going to do these 2 slopes first. We already have these 2 points, so we just need to find these 2, and our drawing tells us that it's 30 millimeters from the centre line out to those points. So again, on our piece, I'm going to put, just for a difference, I have 50 millimeters lined up with the centre. So if I mark 80 on this side, 50 plus 30 is 80. And I mark 20 on this side, 50 minus 30. 50 minus 30 is 20. We get our 2 points. We can T-square those in. This is the 100 line. And again, line these up carefully so that you're not making any mad mistakes. And we want to line up this side carefully as well. Double check where my mark is, it's not hugely visible. We definitely need some new marking glue because it comes out very easily. The next piece we can mark out is this hole here. We only see a semicircle, but it's actually a full hole. Our drawing tells us that it's 40 plus 45 up, so that's 85. So we're going to measure 85 and T-square line across. Here's 85. I'm going to T-square that line across the piece. I'm going to punch it because I'm going to drill it. Sorry, I'm not going to drill it, I'm going to use the dividers on it. And we're told here that the radius of the circle is 15. So 15 on your dividers and draw the circle. In this case, we only need to draw a semicircle. We can now T-square these 2 points straight out to give us these 2 lines. And there we go. Now for the final part of this marking out, there are 4 holes back here. And we've only 1 dimension in relation to them, which doesn't seem like it's enough. The drawing here tells us that from the centre line, it's 21 out to these 2 holes, but it doesn't tell us how far in we are here. Once you realise that these are how the tail fin is held onto the plane, and you get your tail fin drawing, which I have here, the first hole is in 10 and the second hole is in 15. So that's where you can get that information. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to measure 21 either side and then T-square lines up. 21 on our centre line. Mark the edge of the ruler and mark 42 millimeters because that's 21 the opposite direction. I'm going to T-square both of those marks up to about here. Don't need to T-square them the whole way up. Now, as we already saw in this working drawing of the wing, if we come up 10 and then another 15, we have the centres from the back for those two holes. So I'm going to mark it on one side. There's 10, and that's another 15 up. And I'm going to use my T-square to transfer the measurements across to the other side. There's one. And there's two. I can punch those 4 points. And we are almost marked out. Now there are a couple of bend lines we haven't put in. There's a bend line here, and this first one is at 40. We have got this one already. It was the line that went through the centre. So I'm going to measure up 40 from the edge. Mark it. And I'm going to T-square the line across. I'm just going to mark it on the bits that I'm going to see later on. And finally, we have to put in these marks, these ones here, where the fuselage bends down. Our T-square will reach the whole way across to the circle. So we can just continue on that point there, flip it over, and we can T-square the other side as well. And that is the entirety of our piece marked out. If you break it down into sections, it just makes it that little bit easier. I'm sorry about these scratches and everything. Definitely have to get a new glue. Right, so next stage is drilling, and there's a fair bit of drilling on this one to do, so we'll get to that next. Okay, we have a few holes to drill on this piece first of all. I have 3.5mm in the drill bit already, and there are 6 holes to drill on that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to do those first of all. Again, wearing goggles and a piece in the hand vise and being careful. Okay, that's those 6 holes drilled, and as usual I'm just going to deburr them on the back quickly with a large drill bit. Always be careful when you're doing this that you don't cut your fingers on the flutes of the big drill bit. They can be quite sharp, especially with hands that aren't used to rough and sharp implements. Okay, so now we have another hole to drill, and that is here, and it's the 5.5. We change the drill bit. This is a 5.5 drill bit. to drill this hole here. And once again, large drill bit just to gently deburr the back of that hole in case there's anything sticking out. That feels fine. Okay, we now have another 2 holes to drill. We're going to use hole saws for these, so it's just going to take me a few minutes to set up, so I'll be right back. Okay, so I have a 19mm hole saw in here to cut the 24, to cut a hole out here. It is the closest one I have without going too near the size of the hole. Be careful with hole saws, they can be dangerous and they have a lot of torque. So before I start the machine, I'm bringing down the drill bit and lining it up with the centre of the circle. And I'm using a G clamp here to clamp down the piece. The hand vise wouldn't be strong enough to do it properly. So that's clamped in place well, and now we're going to use speed 1 on the drill and bring it down and gently cut through. Okay, so that's the first hole taken out, and we're going to change this now quickly for a larger one to do the second one. Okay, so I've changed out now for a 25mm hole saw, and that's going to cut a hole here in the 30mm, or the diameter 30 semicircle. I've already lined it up and clamped it, so I'm just going to go ahead. And there we go, the 2 holes drilled. Just taking out the G-clamp now. I was using a piece of paper underneath the G-clamp in order to prevent it from damaging the surface too bad. It did take off some of the glue, but nothing too seriously. So we have our 2 holes taken out now. Be careful, they can have sharp edges. And the next thing now is to, if you do it this way, fix up the machine back the way you got it beforehand, and then we're going to go over to the shears and cut off these 2 sections here. Okay, so on the piece here I trimmed off these 2 lines on the shears, and I also just nipped the corners just a little bit not to go over the circle. I'm going to use the bandsaw now to cut down 2 lines here. You're not going to be able to do that in first year or second year, so you'll just have to use a hacksaw basically to get down. So I'm just going to do that now. Right, so when you're cutting that, you want to come straight down and into the semicircle that you've left after the hole cutter. And now it's simply a matter of filing the piece to shape and then bending it obviously after that. I think I may have accidentally not been recording this, which is kind of annoying because I gave a speech at the start. So in case I haven't recorded it properly, so far I filed the corners here at the front and I filed this hole out with half round files, the 150mm variety. I'm now doing the lengths here with large files, 250mm files, rough and smooth first. Always work close to the vise with aluminium, especially thin aluminium. It will just bend and warp around the place if you don't. So I'm actually nearly finished at this stage. I'm just checking here. So when I get back to filing out, I'll speed the whole thing up again. Okay, so there's the piece files. Next thing we have to do is go and bend it. A wee bit tricky, but nothing too major. Right, so we're bending part one now. We have to bend along these two lines here at 90 degrees. The bending machine won't handle the second bend. You could do the first one, but it won't handle the second bend of that. So we're going to use a piece of wood and the vise and a hammer. So the piece of wood, we're going to put it in, make sure it's long enough. We're going to carefully put it into the vise and clamp it so that the piece of wood is behind the line. And don't forget to use soft jaws with this, so that there isn't damage to the work. And you may need to get assistance when doing this. Don't be afraid to ask someone. So I have the piece lined up there. I'm going to just tighten it slightly so that I can still adjust the wood and the metal to make sure everything's okay. Now I can tighten it up properly. I'm going to use a second piece of wood so that I don't damage the piece of metal actually. I'm using a plastic hammer as well in case I do decide to hit that. Now there's one piece of metal just sticking out there, so I'm going to get another piece of metal just to flatten that down. I've just got a piece of scrap aluminium, and if I hit that, it should flatten it up. Okay, so we've got our 190 degree bend done. Now we're going to do the second one in the same fashion. The piece of wood I have is 30mm wide, which is the same as the bend here. So I'm going to put it into the vise, again carefully, watching everything that I do. Make sure everything's lined up and the soft jaws are in place. I'm going to tighten it slightly, so as at least it's gripped, and then I'm going to adjust it while it's slightly tight. And we'll tighten it up properly, and the same again, hammer it down. Now that bit, all slightly close there, I'm just going to try and tap that down a bit. If there are any marks put on with this, the emery paper later on will clean it up. Okay, so there our piece is bent to 90 degrees. We now need to bend the wings back here. Okay, we have our lines and we're going to use a folding bars to bend that. Okay, so we have to bend two sections here. We have to bend this section at 20 degrees and this section at 20 degrees according to our drawing. So the best way to go about this is to actually bend this section out, and then we'll come up and bend this section in, and that should get everything lining up properly. If you bend this section in first, these two ends will hit each other and that presents problems. So first of all, we're going to bend these out 20 degrees on both sides. So we're using a folding bars here, which is a handy tool for sheet metal, and we're going to just open it by pulling it apart, slide your piece of metal in, and at the minute we're not going to worry too much. We're going to put it in our vise and tighten the vise gently. So the piece of metal, I'm actually going to turn it around, is on the other side. Now I'm going to slide this up until we have or slide it until our line is in the correct place. Then I'm going to tighten the vise fully, get it good and tight. I also have a piece of wood here, and this piece of wood has the right angle on it, and when we hold it up here we'll be able to see when we have the piece of metal bent to the right direction. So you can actually bend this with your hand because it's sheet metal. So we want to bend slightly down as low to the bottom as we can. And I'm using my eye to judge that we got it the right distance. And that looks like a good bend. Not very much, but it does the job. So we're going to turn that around now. Line up our piece of metal again in the vise. Tighten gently first of all. Align your piece correctly. Then tighten the vise fully. Using our piece of metal, we'll be able to tell when it's at the right, our piece of wood, we'll be able to tell when it's at the right angle. There we go. So we've now bent the two pieces out at 20 degrees. Now we're going to bend in at 20 degrees up here. So again, it's the same process. On the previous bit, the piece of metal could slide anywhere else. It isn't going to be able to slide anywhere because of this top piece. So this is actually going to have to go in, get it on the line, or as close, and tighten the vise gently, double check, tighten it up. I'm going to use our piece of wood as a guide again and bend the piece of metal in until the metal lines up with the face of the wood here. And we're doing this by eye. It's not critical. A little bit over. And that should be okay. And now we do the other side. Again, tighten up the vise well and bend it in. And there we go. You may need to give just a little adjustment with your hand. But when we're done, our piece should have this shape here. Just trying to get the camera to focus, there we go. So we can now see our plane. The fuselage has the correct shape. If you've done this very well, the holes here should line up. You should be able to see right through to the other set of holes on the other side. If not, it's not terrible, because when you're screwing it together you can clamp them into the correct positions and re-drill them with a hand drill if you wish. That's that part done. It's the last of the sheet metal parts, and it's onto the lathe next.